You are listening to the We Need to Talk About Oscar podcast, and this is our conversation with Benjamin Ree, the director of The Remarkable Life of Ibelin, now available to watch on Netflix.
I've learned a lot. I've spent 4 years studying Mats, and to be able to study a person who's a non-celebrity and see that a non-celebrity has so many kind of left videos, archives, that it's possible to tell his stories. That is amazing.
Benjamin, it's so nice to meet you. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
The Critics' Choice Documentary Awards nominations were announced just yesterday, and 5 nominations for The Remarkable Life of Ibelin, including Best Documentary Feature and Best Director for You, plus Editing, Score, and Biographical Documentary. First of all, congratulations. Very well deserved. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling very happy about it. I think, for me, to see that both the editor and the composer gets a nomination, that was actually what made me the most happy. Because, I know how much work they put into this. The editor was editing the film for 2 years. After 1 year in the editing room, the film still didn't work. So we had a bit of a crisis there. I had to take some sleeping pills in order to sleep at night. The feeling of working on the film for 3 years and then the film does not work. And then the editor, Rob Stenger, he did an amazing job of making the film work. And the same with the composer. The music is what kind of puts a very fragmented film all together. We have so many different forms in the film. It's family videos, it's 3D animation, 2D animation, and we're entering and going in and out of the virtual world and in real life and interviews. And the music, it all kind of puts it all together and makes it smooth and that it flows beautifully. It's like, music works the best in films when you don't recognize it that much. And music in film is all about storytelling. And I think Uno Helmersson has done an amazing job with this film. He's also worked with the film music for 2 years. So that was actually what made me the most happy, to see that they got recognized also.
Did the project and the story itself come to you, or was it something you seeked out and pursued?
I read an article about Mats' life in 2019. That was published also on social media by Mats' uncle, and Mats' uncle was my teacher at school. So that's how I learned about it, basically. I read about it on social media, on Facebook. But I never thought that I would make a film out of it. That article about Mats Ibelin Steen's life, it moved me. And so I just called up the uncle, and then I told him how much that story meant to me. And then Mats' uncle told me that, my brother, he has filmed Mats' whole life. And Mats and his friends, they all communicated in text form. And a lot of those texts were stored. And that was when the first spark of this project began. So I contacted the family, and the first footage I digitalized was footage of Mats as a baby. And right beside Mats was another baby that looked a little bit like me as a baby. So I was laughing a bit. Oh, what a coincidence. Ha ha ha. And then I actually saw it was actually me because my parents were there. So the first footage I saw when beginning the project was Mats as a baby together with me as a baby in a playpen. And I called up my mother and asked her to look in our family album. And there I saw a picture of Mats and me in that same playpen. So that was the first start. It almost felt meant to be for me to make this film. So that was the very beginning of this documentary being made.
And it's such an overused, cliche-esque question, but with this film looking so different from basically anything I've seen before, I'm not at all ashamed to ask this. Did you or could you even look anywhere for any sort of inspiration?
I'm a huge film geek, so I've watched one film a day my whole life. In the weekends, I watch one morning film and go to the theaters in the evening. So, of course, I had a lot of inspiration for this film. I think you have the tradition in film history of metaverse, It goes back to the Phantom Carriage with Victor Sjöström all the way to Everything Everywhere All at Once. And you have Frank Capra's It's a Wonderful Life there. So I think that the metaverse films, of course, was an inspiration for this film, and films that has a kind of story within the story. At the same time, the structure here was actually very much inspired by the structure of Citizen Kane. The film begins with the funeral, the opening of The Remarkable Life of Ibelin. It really tells the story very quickly. The whole story in the opening credits is almost like the newsreel in Citizen Kane. And then we go back in time and we retell the story many times from different perspectives with different forms to try to get a kind of complex picture of who Mats really was. So not necessarily the themes, but the structure of Citizen Kane was a huge inspiration to this film. And also a documentary called Life Animated. Yeah, a lot of inspirations. I could go on and on, but these are the things the editor and we talk a lot about, And sometimes we take inspiration from a single scene in one film. For example, we tell the story from Mats's point of view with voiceover. It's a very kind of stream of consciousness kind of way. That's inspired by a bit Truffaut's Juliet Jim, Mike Mills' Beginners, Chris Marker. So we would see references all the time throughout the film process. And the animation is inspired by YouTubers making fan animations. So yeah, different inspirations for this film.
Incredible. For sure, it's amazing and wonderful to share Mats' story with the world, but most of all with his family, and not just preserving his memory for them, but also adding another layer to it. What was that like for you as a filmmaker and as a human being?
It felt like a huge responsibility to make this film. Also because I knew that when I first approached Mats' family, they were very unsure if they wanted to say yes to be part of this film, because it was like opening a wound for them. The sorrow of losing a child, and then talking about that. They did not know if they emotionally could be able to be part of a film like this. And when they, after some weeks of thinking, said yes, I felt a huge responsibility to tell the story in a representative way. I think that's the big challenge with telling stories from real life, is that film is such a huge reduction of life itself, and then trying to reduce that in a way where you still keep the nuances and complexity, and that you explore both themes but also character traits from different angles and with nuances. That's so difficult. So I think that's also why I tend to tell stories from different perspectives with different forms, to try to reduce life, and then in that reduction still keep complexity and nuances. So that's the goal, and do it in a respectful way. So when we premiered the film at Sundance, Mats' father, Robert, said that he had seen the film 50 times already. And now he has seen it around 200 times. So they have used the film as part of their healing process. And of course, that means a lot to me. It's very moving to know that they've used the film in that way. And for them, they are still going through the process of re-evaluating who their son really was. That is the most important things in life, to experience love outside the family, experience friendships and make an impact. And from that opposite to the total opposite, to realizing that he had so many friends, to realizing that he did experience love, and to realizing that he did make a huge impact in other people's lives. Over 50 people contacted the family from around Europe. A lot of people came to Mats' funeral and told stories about what their son had meant to them. And he changed the lives of his friends fundamentally. So for them to watch the film over and over again is a part of the process of learning about their son after his passing.
Yeah, and truly couldn't imagine a better feedback from them. So yeah, that's amazing. I believe we can state that this is not a movie that can be ruined by spoilers, and its true power lies in the surprisingly deep human connections. And yet, the revelation that can be read as part of the plot or any description of the documentary hits hard for another reason as well, which is the form and order of storytelling you choose, how this underlying vivid life of Mats prevails in front of our eyes. Can you tell us a little bit about the thought process behind that build up and the emotional ride you take the audience on?
I think that for me, the kind of frame story here is about grief. And that was one of the things that got me very interested in the very beginning. I'm interested in stories about grief and how we as humans grieve. And the film is told in almost like a circular symphonic way. So we tell the story many times again and again, but from different perspectives and in different ways. And that is a bit like grief works. It comes in waves and we have to revisit again and again the person we are grieving. So the story is told so many different times in the opening credits, and it's told by the parents, and then again by Mats, and then it becomes an animated film, and then it's told by Mats's friends, and then we also jump in time. And the last time we tell the story is verbally at the funeral. And I think hopefully that makes the film more emotionally resonant with the audience, because we tell it in a circular way. From the very beginning, we know that Mats will die, but we explore his life many times from different angles. But in this kind of framework, there's a film within the film, and that is an animated film. That's a reconstruction of an actual lived Avatar life. And to my knowledge, this is the first time ever an actual lived Avatar life is told in retrospective. And the film within the film is a coming-of-age story. And that was also the goal when I began making this film, was that, when I read thousands of pages of this gaming dialogue, I could recognize a lot of things. Mats did experience a lot of the same things as I did growing up. Only he experienced it in a game and I experienced it in real life. So I really wanted to take that world seriously, and I really wanted to explore how is it like growing up inside a game. And Mats did, he was a very, very kind person, a good listener, funny, intelligent. At the same time, he could be lying, he would lash out towards his friends, he could be very angry, he could be not a good listener at all. And he lost contact with two of his best friends for a while and then got contact with them back again. And that is very recognizable, That's very similar to my experience in growing up. So that was the goal, to take that world seriously and tell a coming-of-age story. And how is it like to grow up inside the game? So that's the film within the film. So, yeah, as you understand, I have many thoughts around this. But those two things, the story of grief and the coming-of-age story, that was the kind of goal from the very beginning.
And as a storyteller, where do you draw the line? Or do you even draw a line between Mats and Ibelin?
And that's a very good question. I think that in the gaming community and role-playing community, they differentiate between in-character and out-of-character. But to give you an example that's not in the film, Ibelin was on trial and was thought to be thrown out of the guild because of some of the mistakes he did. But if he would be thrown out of the guild in character, he would actually be thrown out of character as well. So sometimes there are blurred lines, and that is what they call bleeding. And sometimes it's a very big difference between in and out of character. So it's a very complex question to answer. When you have played the game and you play the character for 20,000 hours, and here we're talking about people who have played a character for 20,000 hours, where do you draw the line between that character and yourself? It is also interesting to reflect upon this in real life as well. We all go into different roles, and we all kind of play different parts depending on who we are together with. It's not an easy answer to that question, but I hope that it shows a bit of the complexity between in and out of character.
Exactly. Exactly. And as for the technical side of recreating Mats' life within the world of the game as Ibelin, how time-consuming was this aspect of the film?
It was very time consuming. So we worked in the editing room of this film for 2 years, and then we were making the animation at the same time. It's possible to take models directly from the internet, import them into 3D programs like Maya. We hired YouTubers to make the animation here. It's their first job. They make these fan animating films independently of the company that owns World of Warcraft. But that's like on a technical level, it takes a lot of time, but also to get it right, you know.
I mean, the emotions, the facial expressions and everything had to be in place.
And then we would like do a version of a scene, and then I would send it to Mats' friends, and then they would give us feedback. My character wouldn't laugh that much, you know. My character would have a bit more brownish eye color. They were of a huge help for this film and the construction of the film. At the same time, we had this huge archive of gaming dialogue and descriptions. And since they are role players, it looks like a movie script, basically, which means that they write out the dialogue, but also expressions and actions. So, for example, Mats would write, "Ibelin seems sincere yet saddened." And the level of specificity on that expression helped us, of course, to interpret it. But we have to interpret that or interpret what they say in the interviews. And then we would give the people who play the characters the scenes, and then they again would give us feedback. We would do a new draft and send it to them. They would give us feedback and new draft. So when we had like a version of the film, we would show it to Mats' friends, his whole guild. The people you see in the film, they had seen it many times, but a lot of his friends that's not in the film hadn't seen it before. And the feedback we got, and it's very nerve-wracking to show it to all of Mats' friends for the first time in the theater. And the feedback we got was that this is exactly how I remember Ibelin, which is a huge compliment. But they had one thing that I didn't like, and they told me there's one mistake here. And I said, oh, what is that? And I was a bit nervous because, hope it's not a big mistake. And then they told me that Ibelin, he liked women with more leathery clothes. So we have to change that. And I said, okay, we're going to change it. So we went into some of the scenes with the women Ibelin is dating, and we put more leather in there, and then we locked the edit after that. So that was kind of part of the process of making this film.
I mean, the devil in the details.
Yes, absolutely.
Was there any fear in you whether you can avoid a shift that you didn't want in focus by taking the story into the digital world?
We had a lot of problems entering the digital world and leaving it. So for a long time, the edit did not work at all. So for every person you see in the film, we need also to introduce their avatars. And at one point, a version of the film was just so confusing because it's too many faces and you didn't know which person played which character. That changed after we began match cutting. So the editor found a solution there to show the interview face and then match cut from the real life interviews into the animated characters' faces. And that worked beautifully because then you knew immediately which person played which character. So that helped a lot with those shifts. But we had, like after 1 year in the editing room, this film did not work at all. We had 30 different test screenings in the theater. We had up to 100 different drafts of the film. And I hope that the film now feels that it flows easily, that it's kind of easy to follow, but it was extremely difficult to make work. Also because, we're changing perspective, jumping in time, we're changing form almost all the time. So for each perspective, we have a different form. And for every time we do a change like that, to make that work without feeling that everything stops, that was a huge challenge for this film.
My final question is a rather big one, and I'm not going to ask it in past tense as this feels to me as an ongoing experience. What have you learned from Mats through this process?
That's a very good question. I've learned a lot. I've spent 4 years studying Mats. And to be able to study a person who's a non-celebrity and see that a non-celebrity has so many kind of left videos, archives, that it's possible to tell his stories, that is amazing. And one of the things I saw and learned from us was that he was really good at asking the question, how are you doing? And meaning it. It's so many different ways to ask that question. Most of us just ask it for politeness. We're not really interested in how are you doing, really. He asked that question and he meant it. And afterwards he prioritized to listen. I think those two things, to ask that question and also have the time and prioritize to listen, that is something that Mats has taught me. And I've been not good at that in my own life. And that's been of huge inspiration to me, because I think we should do that more often. We should ask our friends, how are you really doing? And then prioritize to be there and listen. And that's the paradox here, because he did this through a written text. And they were in front of a screen. And usually it is the screen that sometimes is the obstacle with connecting with our friends, because we're on social media and we ask that question and we really don't have time, or we really non-verbally show that we don't have time. So that is something Mats really taught me, and I try to be better at in my own life. And, when Mats passed away, his parents received around 50 messages about what an impact he had done in their lives. And I think one of the reasons he had made such a huge impact in people's lives was that he asked that question and he meant it and he listened.
And I believe that's a lesson to us all. Benjamin, once again, thank you for your time. And honestly, thank you for this film. I have utmost respect for you and your entire team, because
thank you.
It's one thing to make something that's touching, but for something to be this sincere, I believe is one of the rarest things nowadays.
Thank you so much for saying that. Thank you. Thank you.